our mental health crisis could be linked to a lot of the things that we eat and we like to eat, whether it's sugar or fast food. If you look at Parmesan cheese, especially the light Parmesan cheese in the canister, if you look at the ingredients, it says non-nutritive wood substance, which is sawdust. I mean, for whatever it's worth, we should be paying attention to what we put in our bodies, because I do think that it affects how we digest, how we have energy, what kinds of things we accomplish with that energy. All of that contributes to how we feel about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I had an experience. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Consult a qualified professional for your needs. Views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and not necessarily those of Meet Your Mental Helper Podcast LLC or its affiliates. We are not responsible for actions taken based on this content.
Hi, I'm Jim Weisbecker. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Arizona, Colorado, Florida, and Ohio. The reason I started the Meet Your Mental Helper podcast is kind of selfish in a way, because I just love talking shop with colleagues. But I also think the world needs to know about some of these people. And the reason I say that is I'm amazed at how much they know. And I think to myself, they should be on a podcast. But they're not celebrities. They're just everyday counselors, therapists, coaches, psychologists that work in our communities and grind it out to help us heal and to help us grow. So let's meet today's mental helper.
And welcome to Meet Your Mental Helper. Today we have Morgan deAmezola on, and Morgan works in Miami. She's a therapist who truly embodies the phrase fellow traveler. She has navigated the darkest corners of loss, addiction, and illness, and she's here to show us how to find beauty in the muck of life. Morgan, welcome to Meet Your Mental Helper.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Tell us a little bit about how your journey into this mental health world. How did that start?
It was accidental. I studied art history in undergrad, and I applied to art history programs for graduate school. I'd interned at the Smithsonian in DC and thought I was a competitor for graduate school, and I got declined by all the schools that I applied to. So that summer after I graduated from college, I was working with my dad. My dad is a school psychologist, but he was working with people with disabilities. So I was teaching life skills to people with disabilities, making minimum wage, and living with my parents. And that summer, my dad decided to tell my mom that he had another lover and that he was leaving. And it was a real shock to the whole family. I thought to myself, okay, what's my escape plan? I guess I'll go to grad school. Where am I going to go? So I applied to Illinois State, which was down the street from where I graduated from undergrad. And they told me I could be a graduate student at large, and they had an art therapy program. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that uses my art history background, and I've worked with people with disabilities for much of my life as a side job. So sign me up. And so I started as a grad student at large and eventually made it into the program. So it was completely accidental. And then the day before school started, one of my friends was murdered. And that Saturday, after classes had started, I found her body. And so right in the beginning of graduate school, I was thrown into a huge investigation on a murder. And that was my first foray into mental health, because I was overwhelmed. My dad was leaving my mom. My friend's been murdered. I'm in graduate school. I have no idea. I didn't have the coping skills for any of this. And so I started seeing a counselor on ISU's campus. He was a PhD student who was seeing students on campus, and he helped me a lot. And so did the art therapy program, actually. Did a lot of artwork about my friend's murder. And to this day, it's an unsolved crime, which is another set of circumstances. But my desire to become a therapist kind of happened to me.
Interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot to deal with. First off, so was it your experience seeing a therapist then at that point that got you thinking about it, or was it filed kind of in the back of your mind?
I saw the therapist, and he had such a way with his approach to me. And then he asked me to be a part of a grief group, which, one of the problems of being 22 years old and finding your friend murdered is you're supposed to be a college co-ed. You're supposed to be 22 years old, having a good time and going to parties. And I didn't feel like I fit in anymore. Suddenly I was in another world. And I was dealing with investigators, and I was dealing with this huge crime that everybody was talking about on the campus. And, I've come to understand that trauma is one of those things that it becomes your identity, but you can't really tell anybody about it because they don't relate to it. They don't understand. And so anyway, this therapist helped me see a grief group, which I just I didn't quite fit in. These people had lost their mothers or their fathers or their grandparents. And here I am talking
Sure.
about my friend who was murdered. And it was kind of like a drop the mic kind of thing where nobody knew what to say.
Mm-hmm.
So I really leaned on him. And he helped me process things I didn't even have the language to understand. And I'm very grateful for that. So yeah, kind of combined with everything I was learning in the preliminary classes of the graduate degree really helped me feel like maybe I could turn this into something that could help other people.
That's great. And you're a certified grief educator. How does that differ from traditional talk therapy when you're helping someone navigate loss?
What I've come to understand, and this is where grief and trauma kind of merge, is that these are two things that have to be witnessed. I mean, it's required. And one of the things I love about working with people who have had a loss is hearing the stories, asking them to talk about it. What's the name of your loved one? What happened? And that question, what happened to you, is one of the most profound things we can ask somebody.
Mm-hmm. Just to backtrack a little bit for people watching, just a little more info on Morgan. You're licensed, multi-state licensed therapist. You mentioned earlier your degree in art therapy, and you specialize in grief education and the Gottman method for couples counseling. And then you also have a practice called Mighty Lotus Counseling, where you balance clinical strategy with your own lived experiences, as we're finding out. And you're also a cancer survivor and a 12-step recovery advocate. So you have a lot of life experiences, Morgan.
I do.
Yeah.
I kind of think of myself as a garbage can therapist because I have lived a lot of experiences. So
if you decide to write a book, use that for the title. That's a catchy title, The Garbage Can Therapist. Yeah.
It's so crazy because when I graduated from grad school, I was working as an intern, and I got my license while I was working at a rehab for adolescents who were in recovery. And I was not in recovery myself at all. In fact, the only thing I'd really been through was my parents' separation and the trauma of my friend, which is a lot. But at 25, 26 years old, you haven't really learned a lot. I hadn't really learned a lot from life. And so So I was a therapist back then. I was licensed in Illinois, and I worked at this facility. And in 2000, I moved to Washington, D.C. I had been married myself, and I got divorced, and I moved to D.C. And this was before we had computers and telehealth, and there was no reason for me to renew my license in Illinois. So I moved to D.C., and I let my license in Illinois expire, and I went into sales. And I can't remember what the question was. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Oh, life. And
just a lot of life happening. Yeah.
yeah, so I got into sales, and I was actually very successful. I worked in the wine industry. I worked for a distributing company, and then worked as an importer, and then worked for a couple of nationwide import companies. And I was a territory manager and traveled all over the world, loved it. Apparently drank a lot too. And so that's how I wound up in a 12-step program, and not without a lot of uh, difficulty. I went to rehab 5 times and lived in halfway houses, was detoxed several times. It was a really, really
Wow.
difficult situation for me and my whole family. I mean, my dad was, he's got Irish roots, and my mom has German roots. So alcohol was kind of a part of our culture. And then I'm selling alcohol as a lifestyle. I'm selling the lifestyle.
Mhm.
And in fact, the funny thing is, when I got the job, the first job in the wine business, I sat down with this guy who was interviewing me for the position. And he said, "You have a master's degree in art therapy. You've been a counselor. Why should I hire you?" And I
Mhm.
said, "I've been selling sobriety and recovery for years to adolescents who don't want it. So if you can tell me a tougher sale than that, you let me know." And he looked at me and he said, "I can teach you everything you need to know about sales. I can't teach you personality." And I got the
Yeah.
job.
Nice.
So I was in sales for a long time, and moved from DC to Charleston, South Carolina, moved from there to Mississippi, and then moved from there down here to Miami. Various moves related to work, and I loved the wine business. It was very fun until it wasn't, and
Mhm.
until alcohol became more of a problem than a livelihood. And so when I finally got sober, which was about 8 years ago, a little over 8 years ago, I was in a rehab, and I got a job at Macy's. I had to start all over from scratch. I lost my house, I lost my car, lost my license, lost my livelihood, lost, the wine business.
Mhm.
And so I'm working at Macy's, and I'm going to 12-step meetings. And I was telling my story at a meeting, and I shared that I had been a licensed therapist in the past, that I knew the DSM, that I knew how to hide behind the criteria for addiction and alcoholism. So I had kept my problems um, away from my own awareness for a long
Mhm.
time. So I shared all of that, and this woman came up to me after the meeting, and she said, "I'm hiring therapists for my rehab. I want you to apply." And that was in 2019, 2018. So I applied, I interviewed, I got the job, and I started working as a therapist at the rehab. And she said, "How long do you think it'll take you to get licensed in Florida?" And I said, "I don't know, probably a year." And it was a year and a month to the date that I started with her facility that I got licensed in Florida, because I had to go back and take a couple classes. I had to find my old professor who signed off on my practicum. I had to find the guy who signed off on my supervision hours. It was a huge,
Yeah.
I don't know, voyage through my past to find
Mhm.
these names and get these signatures. But I did get licensed. And then COVID happened. And so I was working from home and leading groups for this facility. And I got hired by another private practice to work for them and do individual sessions through telehealth. And then it was in 2020 when I went out on my own. So it's
Great.
been a really fast but crazy journey back into counseling.
For sure. When you look back, was there a specific aha moment in the wine industry where you realized you needed a change or get back to recovery or
I had a moment before I got into the wine business. I remember still living in Illinois, being married, and sitting at a bar in front of a pint of beer and having a conversation with that beer and saying, "You and me are gonna have a problem one day." And I can tell you the bar stool and I can tell you the bar, and, I wasn't ready to deal with it then. But I think that my relationship with alcohol was a lot like my relationship with food and a lot like my relationship with exercise. I'd always overdone things. I'd always taken it to the max. And I'd always used these things as coping mechanisms. And it wasn't until much later that I realized there were other ways to cope with things.
Hmm. Kind of going back to grief for a moment. Um, I do a lot of grief therapy myself. Find it really rewarding, and I can remember, like my first supervisor going, "Oh my God, I wouldn't want to do that," or, "Well, you see this person, child or their somebody died," and I was always thought, "Well, why?" And she goes, it's just too." But I always find, and one of the trauma trainings I went to, the trainer who I really respected said to read Worden. Are you familiar with Worden's work on grief?
No.
Oh, he kind of does it a little differently. He says grief isn't so much stages, but tasks you have to complete.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're kind of sounded like you're kind of mentioning that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of grief is validation, validating
Yeah.
what people are experiencing. What do you think about that?
I think it is, just to say what was their name? In fact, this morning I had a session with a client who they had to put the family dog down a couple weeks ago. And the first question I asked was, "What was your dog's name? And how did you come to meet her?" And I could see like a spark in her eye. And it was, like, let's bring her back to life. Let's talk about her. And I think whether it's a person or a pet or a job or, like we all deal with grief in some way. And it's one of those emotions we don't really learn what to do with. I think in grade school, my emotional education was, here's a smiley face, here's a sad face, here's an angry face. But I was never stopped in the moment of the emotion and told this is what you're feeling or this is what it is.
Yeah.
And so grief is just one of those complicated feelings that shows up in all kinds of ways. So it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be some tragic loss. But my friend who was murdered, one of the things that I felt the most was isolated because nobody wanted to ask me about it because they
Hmm.
didn't know what to say. And what I wanted to do the most was talk about it. I still,
Wow.
30 years later, want to talk about her. WGN in Chicago asked me to come up and do an interview because they're doing kind of a expose on an unsolved crime on a cold case.
Hmm.
And I was I was delighted to go because I get to talk about my friend Jen. And some of my friends and family were like, "Why would you do that?" I said, "You
Hmm.
don't understand. Like, this gives me a chance to process some of what I went through. Even 30 years later, it's still in there.
Sure.
And to get to talk about her, I get to say her name out loud again.
Hmm.
And that's a gift. So when we
Yeah.
get to do that for somebody else as counselors, I think that's a big deal.
And kind of on that topic, you mentioned the trauma around it because you found Jen. Is that
Mhm,
correct? So you
mhm,
have that element as a layer, and then
mhm.
losing this friend,
Yeah,
and then maybe a third layer, lack of closure as to
yeah,
because why is a big word in grief.
yeah.
I'm dealing with
Why?
a lot of sometimes it comes in batches, clients that have had breakups, and so relationship breaks, and it's there's always the why, the why.
Yeah.
What,
What did I do? What did I not do? How could I have
right.
changed it?
Hmm.
What would I have
So
said? Yeah.
is that something that took a while for you to process,
I'm
and
still processing it.
still processing it?
Yeah. In fact, I just reached out to a counselor because when I did this interview with WGN last month, I said to my husband, I think there's more stuff I haven't really worked through. You know, my 22-year-old brain who saw a therapist back then and my 54-year-old brain today, we have different language. We think different thoughts. We have different ways of processing. So I think I'm ready to unveil another layer of this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, trauma shows up in all kinds of ways, and it's an overwhelming sense of I don't know what to do, and yet this has become who I am. And that was one of the things that my counselor back then understood about what I was dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we just sat, and I just needed him to just sit with me, and I needed to tell him all the crazy things I was doing. I had this like crazy, um, I don't know what I would call it, imagination, and I would picture myself giving myself paper cuts in my eyes. And I'm sharing this, and I know it sounds really crazy,
Yeah.
but and I wouldn't have shared it with anybody except him. And back then when I did bring it up, he said, "Your mind is trying to find ways to move this through, and that makes sense to me." He said, "But let's not do that. Why don't you close the doors in your car and scream as loud as you can?" And that's what I did almost
Mm-hmm.
every day for a while. And it was just like this strange release. I just needed, I had these crazy ideas of how to release it, but he just simplified it. He's like, "Why don't you try this?" And it helped. And so trauma is just a peculiar thing that if he wouldn't have, if he wouldn't have given me the space to talk about what I was imagining or processing, I don't know that I would have made it through that time. It was just overwhelming.
Yeah. And
And
I
so,
always I always liken it to software. You know, you have software in your brain and it gets updates, but when trauma happens, the updates stop.
yeah,
And then you can, like that 22-year-old self is probably going, "Hey, I'm still working with this." And
yeah.
it's like when you boot up a program and the little circle keeps going.
The
I
beach
always
ball
tell,
cat.
yeah,
Yeah,
I do a lot of trauma work. I always tell people, as we take the energy off these
yeah,
triggers, you're going to get your updates and then
yeah,
see things through your adult lens,
yeah.
you
And so
know.
I am looking forward to processing some of this as an adult because and as a woman in recovery from alcoholism, when I was 22, my friend and I used to go to the bars and we drank with impunity. We would scam drinks off of friends and guys, and it was always somebody's birthday. So when I'm asked to go back to being 22 and what it was it like to be Jen's friend and what did we do, my mind goes back to I can drink.
Hmm.
And so I'm always grateful when my husband comes with me because he's in recovery too, and I can say, okay, we probably need to go to a meeting, or we need to call somebody, or I need to talk about this because the last thing I need is a drink. But it's funny what the brain can do with that kind of stuff. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so
And yeah, you're also involved with nutrition and holistic support. How do you see that connection between health and mental recovery?
I think this is a big deal. I'm really excited about this.
I agree.
Um, it's sort of like that frontier that nobody really has looked at.
Hmm.
And I'm in the middle of a training right now with Leslie Korn, and she's the first name that I've come up with in the nutrition and mental health world. Although I know there are some other people following in her footsteps. So I was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 2020. And it was a surprise. There's no history of colon or esophageal cancer in my family. My mom had breast cancer, and there's been some other spotty cancers in my family history, but nothing like this. So I was diagnosed with this tumor, and thank God it was stage 1. So they were able to do the typical procedure, which is called a McEwen surgery. They did chemo and radiation, and then the surgery, they removed my esophagus and they pulled my stomach up and created a new one.
Wow.
So somewhere around here, I have like right where my neck meets my collarbone, I have um, my stomach starts and my esophagus ends. And I was on a feeding tube for 2 months, and I was on a very strict diet for a while after that. And because my stomach had been compromised so much to create an esophagus, I was not able to eat as much as I was used to being able to eat, or the same things. And then a couple years after I had that surgery, I had a bowel obstruction in my small intestine where the feeding tube had been, probably adhesion related. And then just last year, January 8th, I had a bowel obstruction in my colon. So I've had a lot of gastric stuff happen. So in my own personal journey, I've had to really consider different types of diets and eliminating different things. I've used the FODMAP diet, which eliminates a lot of vegetables and fruits, and I've been gluten-free and I've been dairy-free. I've tried all these different things to try to ease my digestive process. And in doing so, what I've realized is that we are emotionally attached to what and how we eat, and what and how we eat is definitely attached to how we feel and how we
Mm-hmm.
think.
It's a vicious circle.
And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that old saying, we are what we eat. Well, yeah. I mean, if you eat processed food, imagine eating a sad face every day.
Mm-hmm. That's a good
You're
good
going to
way to
be
look
pretty
at it.
sad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also did the yoga teacher training. And one of the things I learned in yoga teacher training is that if you want to have energy, get your food as close to the living source it was as possible. So picking vegetables out of your backyard might not be an option for you, but going to a farmer's market for sure is way better than canned foods, way better than frozen. My parents used to split a cow with my grandparents when we were growing up. So the cow would get butchered by the butcher, and then we would, put it in the freezer for the winter months.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Illinois, and that was as close to the living source as possible. It didn't go through meat packing plants and processing and,
Yeah.
straight from the farmer. And I think that that's a healthier way to view food. And I think, our mental health crisis could be linked to a lot of the things that we eat and we like to eat, whether it's sugar or fast food or, I learned not too long ago, if you look at Parmesan cheese, especially the light Parmesan cheese in the canister, if you look at the ingredients, it says non-nutritive wood substance, which is sawdust. There's sawdust in your Parmesan cheese.
Good fiber, though.
Yeah, right. I mean, for whatever it's worth, we should be paying attention to what we put in our bodies, because I do think that it affects how we digest, how we have energy, what kinds of things we accomplish with that energy. All of that contributes to how we feel about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I had an
Um,
experience, maybe it was a year ago, because I've tried to be healthy. And it was one of those days where I just said, throw caution to the wind, the hell with it. And I went to a fast food hamburger place. It sounds like muck something.
like a
and
confession.
and I just got like a double quarter pounder, order of fries, a Dr. Pepper, and then it was just kind of one of those, maybe it was like a coping mechanism, but two things happened. I went back for the second half of my day. I had 4 more sessions, and I couldn't believe how cloudy I was.
Yeah.
Everything was foggy. I was struggling to stay focused. I just felt weak. And I was talking to other people who have done the same thing, and they said, yeah, that's how I feel too. And then you
Yeah.
kind of go for that few moments of what I thought were enjoyment. The
Yeah.
rest, and then the irony is feeling hungry pretty fast again.
Yeah.
But I just remember the mental fog of it.
I remember, and it was a while ago when that movie came out, Super Size Me. And I remember his name because it's Morgan. Morgan Spurlock did the movie, who's passed away from cancer since then, but he did 30 days of McDonald's
I
every meal
remember that. Mm-hmm.
and reporting a lot of the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of all of these things too. And I do I like to talk to my clients about this. We talk about congruency a lot because I can say one thing and then do another and then tell you what I really mean is this. Do as I say, not as I do.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where congruency starts to begin. So I go to the gym, I'm very healthy, I take my vitamins, I've had these bowel obstructions, I pay attention to everything I eat. If one of my clients saw me at McDonald's, they would probably go, something's not right here, and I think about that with money too. If I tell you I'm saving for a house, but you see me at Ferragamo buying perfume, you're going to go, wait a minute, is she really doing that? And so I think, whether it's food or money or relationships or exercise or weight or whatever, I ask my clients, like, if I were to sit on your shoulder for a week and you didn't know I was there, would I be able to tell what your goals are based on how you're behaving? And most of the
Good
time they
point.
say no. So anyway, I don't know how that relates to what you were saying about fast food, but I
Well, it's
do
good,
think
solid advice, though.
I know.
It really
You don't want
is.
me sitting on your shoulder.
Yeah.
Um, but convenience, like, we all love convenience and we love food made for us. For some reason, it feels like love, even though it's
Dopamine.
fast
Mm.
food.
It's the old dopamine hit we get from
Yeah.
that, and it is addictive. Food can be very addictive for
Yes.
sure. Um, you also work with young adults with self-esteem,
Yeah.
and that's we have a lot in common. That's one of my favorite areas too.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, tell me a little bit about what you notice with young adults in self-esteem, or in anybody in self-esteem.
Self-esteem is really hard to define because everybody's got a different idea of what it means. And what's interesting is young people will say, well, self-esteem is about being popular and um, looking good in a bikini or being the quarterback of the football team or, what have you. But it's really about how you feel about yourself. And it kind of goes back to that congruency. Like, are your behaviors matching what you say you are? And are you validating yourself? What kinds of things are you saying to yourself? And it doesn't have to be as cheesy as affirmations, post-it notes that say, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you're great. It's more like, how often are you taking a moment to pat yourself on the back for being you, for doing that thing that you do that makes you different? Or how often are you appreciating a good grade? Or, um, I I find that young people today are very interested in mental health, but they have very few resources around them telling them how to have it.
hmm And when you say young people, what you're talking 18 and up pretty much,
Yeah,
right?
I'm talking, college age, kind of where the
Mhm.
abstract thinking is starting to come
'Cause
into play. And
I know I'm not far from Arizona State, and they'll give students a 30-minute session. I think they limit it, if I'm wrong, correct me, but I think they limit it to 3 30-minute sessions. And in fairness, then they do refer them out, but it's something, but not a lot for when you think about that population,
yeah, no, it's not.
you know.
Um, One of the things that I have learned about self-esteem is that it is a process and it is an inventory, like a valid inventory of all of your pros and cons and having a template of what to do with them. Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I'm not so good at. And being able to say, okay, these are things I'm probably never going to be good at. Like signing my name with my left hand, I'll probably never be good at that because I'm not willing to work on it. But I do like my handwriting and I do like my signature. So that is something that's good that I do. Um, d- uh, Getting comfortable with all of our assets and our detriments, our character defects is really the name of self-esteem. It's not about only having good self-esteem. It's about being able to accept what's not so great or what you need to work on. And when I outline it like that, especially to young people, it makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I
can we
find,
have a healthy assessment of who and what you are and what you like to do? And
yeah, I find a lot of people compare themselves to somebody in their peer group,
hmm
and I find that that's a big one. I always say, only compare yourself to a previous version of yourself.
yeah,
You know,
that's great advice.
2016 you to 2025 you, is there a difference? And nobody
Yeah,
has yet said, no, I'm that same person.
yeah,
Or I haven't made any progress in 9 years,
yeah,
But we were talking a little before the podcast about imposter syndrome.
yeah.
I know I've had my share of that throughout my life. Even when I was very successful at things, it was when
hmm
it seems like it peaked the most sometimes. Do you see that as being a big connection to self-esteem?
Yeah, I do. And I wrote a little paragraph that I haven't shared with anybody, but maybe I'll email it to you. Uh, that the best I've come up with about imposter syndrome is authenticity is the solution. And I've learned this in counseling as a therapist. I probably learn more from my clients than they learn from me. And being able to say that with utmost humility and pride that I love my clients for what they give me is the greatest gift. And that is what's helped me get past imposter syndrome. Because I absolutely had that when I was a therapist before and absolutely struggle with it at times. Um, but then when I remember that there's so much I don't know and I'm okay with that, and there's always ways to learn what I don't know or try to learn. That's why I call myself a garbage can therapist. I've been through a lot of things, but I'm always interested in learning something else. So as long as I'm continuing to learn and okay with saying I don't know, but let me see if I can find out, that imposter syndrome seems to fade.
Hmm. Great point. Yeah, I think sometimes you just have to, I think one of the things for me was always thinking I need to know everything.
Yeah. And I
Especially
felt that way before.
when I was in a past life in industrial sales, or whether I was when I first started in this, I call it a calling, and I would think, so when I was doing supervision, not doing it, but taking supervision, to get my hours, my supervisor would say, I'd say, here's a hard case. This is going on. And then she'd give me one sentence and I'd go, wow. But then I would go read 4 books on it instead of
Yeah.
just taking her one suggestion and being
Yeah.
done with it. I would have to go, oh, I see. Okay. Now, and that just drains you. It wears you out. You do learn some things,
Yeah.
but it's not sustainable.
I think humility is the key. I really do. Saying,
Hmm.
yeah, okay, I don't know. I don't know. But um I had a supervisor years ago who did not disclose anything. He didn't share about his personal life, didn't share about his kids or his wife or anything. And he used to tell me that self-disclosure was not okay. And I think there was a period of time when that was true, but what I found, and this kind of ties into the imposter syndrome, is my my experience is my greatest asset. What I have witnessed or learned or seen or done or have been through is these have been the best teachers.
Hmm.
And I don't know, it was a big moment for me when I was able to say, I disagree with that. I disagree with his point of view. He's a very successful therapist, so
Hmm.
I give him absolute props. But my approach is just different. And I think there's room for all of our styles of therapy.
Yeah,
Uh,
I remember in graduate school, studying about the therapist client relationship, and if they said something like, "Do you ever get anxiety?" you were supposed to answer with a question like, "Well, now why
yeah.
would you ask me? Why is that important for you to know if I get anxiety?" And I my second supervisor, she said I use a relational approach, and she was relational in supervision, and that's just
she said, and I really felt comfortable when she said, and actually my first supervisor was very relational too, but she said, I'm happy to tell clients that I had a panic attack at the grocery store. I'm happy to tell them I can't go to this one big box store because it's just the sensory stuff's overwhelming to me or whatever. And I remember thinking that's different from telling them real personal things. It's kind of
Mhm.
like, and there was a technique somebody used they said, ask your client to ask you the question, like, ask me if I've
Uh,
ever had a
yeah.
really bad day where I flip somebody off or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I go ahead, ask me, and they'll say it. Did you ever? I go, yes. And it's I think
I love that.
the relational approach is so much better. I had a client a while back say, it must be nice that you don't have to deal with any of this stuff. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, because you are a therapist, you know all these things. You're like, I'm living in a utopia. I said, no, no, no. I said, when someone cuts me off in traffic, I do use the techniques, but I'm still, not happy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I,
No. I mean, I've had therapists in multiple rehabs and in the therapy that I've done for myself where I have felt like an outsider.
Mhm.
And I don't think that creates a safe place. I just have never felt good about disclosing. And it was the sponsors, it was the therapists that were in recovery. Those were the ones that I could unload my darkest secrets to because I felt understood and I felt like it was a safe place. I mean, book smart therapists are good therapists. There's no doubt that I've had those too, but the relational therapists, the ones that understand and really come from a place of compassion and empathy, that's where my growth has been. That's what I hope for
Yeah.
my clients too. Um,
I see that a lot I'll have clients say, you're my third, fourth therapist. And I always ask them, what happened with the other three? And they'll say,
mhm.
they just let me talk and they nodded.
Yeah.
And then occasionally would make a comment like, that must be hard. And then the hour was over, and they would
Yeah.
always say they were nice people. I like, they were
Mhm.
very nice, but I'm still where I was when I started, you know.
Yeah.
So I do like the relational approach, and I think it also goes a long way into, the more somebody sees you're kind of on their level, the more they're willing to share, the more rapport
Mhm.
you build. If you talk about, I often give clients my mechanic, the ones that live by me. I'll go, try this guy out. They'll be complaining about how expensive their car repair is or whatnot. I hope I should get a commission for that. But
Yeah, I think, two of the most valuable words in the human language are me too.
no, that's a good one.
Mm.
Hmm. And you just came up with another book title there.
Well, I heard somebody say one time, and I think about this a lot. If there's a word for what you are experiencing, it means it's happened to somebody else too.
Hmm.
And there's something comforting about that. As painful as that word might be, to know that you're not alone, I think that's powerful.
For sure. For sure. Your father was a school psychologist.
Yeah.
And what was the lesson you learned about the human condition around the dinner table, or did he talk much about it?
My dad was a complicated man. He was maybe not the best husband, but he was a really amazing father. And I'm so grateful he was my dad. He always made time or made way for people, including me. I learned, so it wasn't necessarily at the dinner table. I remember in high school, this is one of the first times I really got to see my dad at work. I was in high school, I was a freshman, and I was getting bullied by these girls that were juniors and seniors. And it was mean bullying. I mean, they were pushing me and I wasn't participating in courses or PE because I didn't want any interaction with these girls. And my dad taught me the phrase systematic desensitization. And he would sit with me while I would be going to sleep, and he would talk me through sitting on this park bench and seeing these girls walk by. And he would help me with my nervous system so that when I would encounter these girls at school, I wouldn't have so much anxiety about it. And so I got to see him do that, and that was really cool, and it really helped me a lot. And then later on, most of the work I saw him do was with people with disabilities. And this was, the 70s and 80s when there was kind of a transition to the Americans with Disabilities Act was coming into play, I think around 1978 or something. And a lot of people they were exposing had been over medicated and put in institutions because they didn't know what to do with these people. And my dad worked for this facility in my hometown that had a 0 to 3 program for little kids. And then there was a high school, and then there was integration into our high school. And then there was a workshop and living group homes that I worked in when I was old enough to, helping people live as independently as possible. In the school, there was this young boy named Brandon, and he had been caught in his mother's birth canal during birth. And so it had cut off his circulation to his brain. So they thought he was basically a vegetable. And they had him in this school setting, in some kind of specialized wheelchair. And he was just kind of treated like a vegetable. He was given food, and that was about it. One day, my dad and one of the women working there they shared some kind of joke. Out of the corner of my eye, my dad saw Brandon smile, and he realized something was there. And so this is, back in the 70s, he created this board that would allow Brandon to hit a button with his head as a cursor went across an alphabet, and Brandon could start to spell out words.
Wow.
And they discovered that his brain was fully functional, that he was witnessing everything around him. He had no ability to speak or to share. So it's like this great uncovering of this young boy. And I remember my dad working tirelessly to put this together. This was a long time ago. So,
Yeah.
but what I learned from my dad was that everybody's capable. They just don't always have the tools to do what they need to do or want to do. And if you can help people be able or capable, that's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was a college professor, so she did the same thing with her students. So I grew up in a household that was very much about helping people move to the next level, whatever that looked like.
Yeah,
And
that's
it
a
was a
neat.
very enriching experience to be a child in my home.
Yeah,
I was very lucky.
that's great. When you think kind of what you're talking about, that's amazing. Because people like that kid that your dad recognized are so marginalized, so forgotten about. And it's that's pretty remarkable story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Why do you think we as a society still struggle to see mental health as maintenance rather than just an emergency repair? I mean, like I go to the doctor multiple times, once a year for a checkup. Maybe if I have the flu, I'll go again, or maybe if my elbow hurts, I'll go again. So maybe 3-4 times a year, I'm taking time to do something for my physical body. But why don't people look at mental health the same way, even if they're not experiencing something that needs a repair, but, come in and just kind of talk about what's going on?
I think it's changing. I think COVID, if it did anything positive, it helped us see that it was okay to not be okay. But I think a lot of cultures have a tremendous stigma. I live in Miami, there's a huge Latin population here where the idea of treating your mental health means something must be seriously wrong with you or you need to be institutionalized. And, that's one of those multicultural things that we deal with down here. Um, and so at the same time, I think this new generation of young people have somehow told each other that it's okay to need counseling or to have somebody to talk to. And so I do think this is changing. But I think, like if you can't see it, you can't identify it. And so it's really hard to say, and I grew up in a household like this too, where we were emotionally forbidden, stunted, silenced. My mom would say, if you're upset, then go to your room. And, or, I've heard people say, oh, I'll give you something to cry about if you're going to cry. These kinds of statements tell people that you're not allowed to have emotions. It's not normal to be upset, that to be disappointed that you didn't get what you wanted at the toy store, or that your sister got more than you did, that shame on you for having those feelings. So you might as, what you learn is I might as well not even have any feelings because they just cause too much trouble. And then what we have is a whole bunch of people that are afraid to talk about their feelings. Probably because they don't have the language to do it. It's like if you told me to go to Russia and ask for directions, I wouldn't know how to ask which way is right or left in Russian. And so to ask somebody to speak about emotion in a language they've never learned, they're going to end up being kind of starry-eyed, or they're going to stonewall
Yeah,
because
I
they don't
love
know
that.
what else
And
to do.
I love that analogy.
Yeah. So I use language a lot because we all have varying degrees of emotional language, of intellectual language, of attachment language. And so when I kind of phrase it like that, it helps people see that, maybe you're not on the same level as the person you're trying to have an emotional conversation with. Maybe they just don't have the words to meet you halfway. So
And
I I I'm not as negative as what you sound when you ask me that question, because I really do think that this is changing. But I think a lot of it has to do with unlearning old phrases and old habits that we learned from the generations before, that these things just shouldn't be talked about. My husband will say, I'm supposed to keep everything in the vault. We don't talk about anything. And that becomes problematic when it causes heart problems or digestive problems or dementia, or whatever
so
other
true.
physical somatic symptoms we get because we're holding things inside.
So you mentioned authenticity earlier as we were talking about imposter syndrome. We live in a world of certainly a lot of filters and social media, how we present ourselves, eating this incredible dish, whatever it is, all the dumb stuff that gets posted on there. How do you help a client find their true, unfiltered, authentic self?
That's a great question. Um, what I'm thinking about is the other day I was driving my car, and I was thinking about the color blue because I've always liked the color blue. And I was thinking, is the color blue still my favorite color? And I know this is like a weird, conversation in my own head, but I'm like, is it still my favorite color? Yeah, I think it is. And what it reminded me of was that I tell couples a lot of times to update their files on each other, to go out for dinner, ask each other, what's your favorite thing to eat? What's your favorite color? Because sometimes you get so caught up in the routine of being in a marriage or a household and you forget to ask these questions or get to know each other all over from scratch again. And I think some of this authenticity comes from updating your files on yourself. I think, that, and I like to ask those kinds of questions. Like, what do you like to do? What, if you had free time, what would you do for an afternoon? Or who do you call when you're bored? And these kinds of questions help people like get kind of connected to that authentic part of themselves. How much time do you spend by yourself? How much time do you spend with the TV on or with the TV off? Like these are indicative of how comfortable people are with their authentic self or how well they know themselves. And so I do like to ask those questions, but I don't ask them as often as I probably should. But definitely in the intake interview, I will ask questions like that.
Yeah. When What puts gas in your gas tank? I know you mentioned when clients tell you they've had some transformations or a "I thought of you" when statement.
Yeah.
What I mean, I know that certainly is important to me, and sometimes clients make great strides, and then they just there's no closure. They
Yeah.
just all of a sudden they cancel their last appointment, and that's it. That's
Yeah.
always and but I know they've made the
The
progress. I'm not
heartbreak of
worried
being a
about it.
therapist.
Yeah. So what kind of recharges your battery in a job where we are depleted by empathy sometimes?
I that's such a loaded question. I get referrals a lot of times from families that will send other families to me. So there's nothing better than a referral because somebody said something positive about you. Um, so I definitely love that. But when clients come back to me and say, I couldn't wait to tell you that I did this or I did that or I did what you suggested or I took your advice or any of that feels so good. I
Mhm.
don't want anybody to ever say it to me because they think it's what I wanna hear. That's the
For sure.
pitfall of that.
Mhm.
But I do get such a charge out of, the recidivism rate, when people say, I don't wanna see another counselor," or I had one client who is working on her PhD in psychology, and she said, we were doing telehealth, and she said, "I think I'd rather go see somebody in person. Nothing against you, I probably need to expand my experience." So I said, "Great. Well, good luck to you. All the best." And it was a month later, she called me. She said, "I think I want to come back." And it's not that I feel competitive with anybody. I don't want to steal customers. It's not like that. It's more, she tried a couple other counselors and they weren't a good fit. And she liked the fact that I knew her whole backstory and there was some comfortability there. But I've worked really hard to detach from the I'm trying to say, I'm not quite sure how to say this. That I need the validation, that I need the words of encouragement. I've really tried hard to do the best I can and accept that if I'm not the right fit, I'm not the right fit, or if I can only take them to a certain level, that they go to another level with somebody else. So I don't know that I look for that validation in those kinds of ways. I kind of focus more on connection. I don't know. I like the hour that I have with them, and that's validating enough. But it's taken me a while because I've gotten my feelings hurt, and I've
Mhm.
been devastated by losing clients before. But
Yeah, that's a great point. Just realizing they're there, you're present to them,
mhm.
is really powerful. I know, and I've always been results oriented. So there was a time when I struggled with, you have to get better, you know,
Yeah.
and, uh, and a supervisor, not my main supervisor, but one that filled in at a clinic pointed that out to me. She just did it in a really horrible way, embarrassing me in front of everybody. But
Oh,
I thought it was a strength because I want people to get better, but it's got to be on their timeline, not yours.
right.
And that was
I had a
what a
client like
tripping point
that.
for me. Hmm.
I was pushing, treatment plan goals on a client, and he finally said, "I'm tired of discouraging you. I think I'm gonna stop therapy." And then he came back, and he said,
Hmm.
"You know what?" And I said, I owe you an apology too, because I was speaking from the insurance point of view, and they wanna see progress, and I wanted to see you growing with the treatment plan, and what you really wanted was somebody to create a safe space for you to explore what you wanted to do, and I learned from that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard though, it's hard to know because I had Medicare called me yesterday for a client, and they wanted to see the outcomes of a client, and, I mean, he's 70 years old, he's homebound. What do they wanna see? You know? I thought,
Yeah.
I'm one of his only contacts outside of his house. It's good that he shows up on time every week,
I had one of those
and
audits recently too.
yeah.
And
It's hard because everybody wants measurable success.
yeah. Yeah, Medicare's good for that. And it's, I think that they said, make sure you're doing the GAD-7 more often with him. And I'm like, well, I talk to him every week. And
I know.
you can look at he has PTSD, this and that and the other thing. And it's
Yeah.
like, but anyway, that's anytime you get the government involved, you have that. You got to make paperwork. It's
Yeah.
one of the things I dreaded in community health was the 35 pages of an intake where you're like, all the things involved there. Um, so as we kind of wrap it up, what are some misunderstandings about therapy or some things that you would like people to know that might be thinking about it or thinking, should I do it? Should I not do it? Especially people in Florida, or you have multiple licenses. But
Mhm.
what do you think is the biggest misconception about starting therapy?
That it's cruel or that it's uncomfortable or that it's unsafe. I think that good therapists know how to create rapport and empathy and compassion right off the get-go. Because if you don't, if we don't, if I don't, they won't come back. I wouldn't wanna come back. So, I try to always listen and be, compassionate and focus on what they wanna work on. Usually what they wanna work on, though, isn't what you end up working on in the end, but I I think it's a lot like getting your nails done or getting your hair done. It can be a self-care that maybe you haven't been introduced to yet, but you'll enjoy it, you just don't know what you're missing. I remember the first time I got my nails done, I was probably 23, 24 years old, and a friend of mine was like, "Oh, let's go get our nails done," and I'd never done that, and then I get my nails done probably every 2 weeks now, so it was something I didn't know I was missing until I tried it, and I realized how healthy and good it felt, and how it boosted how I felt about myself, and
Yeah.
so, the old idea that we're gonna psychoanalyze your dreams, and we're gonna talk about your relationship with your mother, and we're gonna pull all these things out of your past, I think that's kinda become pretty old-fashioned, and modern day counseling is a lot more like realizing the more isolated we are with social media and all these things that we put between each other as human beings, the more we need human contact.
Yeah.
And so, if it's nothing else, it's human contact. It's not AI telling you what you should do about your boyfriend. It's another person listening to all the ins and outs of what's going on.
I'm glad you brought that up. When I first started my practicum, and of course, us guys are kind of a minority in therapy world, but some of the other women there would say, gave my client the advice to get her nails done, and it was so foreign to me. I'm like, what? So,
Yes. It's like making your bed. It's like that thing that you
yeah.
do that kind of says, "This is how I feel about myself."
And I always feel great when I get a haircut. It's like I'm
Mhm.
getting one tomorrow, and I always feel there's something about when I get in that car, look in the rearview mirror, and I go,
Yeah.
"Gosh, this feels good." It's like
Yeah.
there's just something psychological about it.
I took care of myself today.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Mhm.
I just want to mention too, we will link all of Morgan's contact information underneath the podcast. If you want to get a hold of her, reach out to her. So we'll have all that there. And there's so much more we could get into, but I sure appreciate your time today, Morgan. And maybe we can do this again and kind of cover, because Morgan's involved with a lot of stuff, and that's that we didn't even get to today. So let's, maybe do this again down the road and kind of look at
I
some of
would
that
love
other
that.
stuff, because you're very insightful and it's been great talking to you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege, really, to talk to you too. I
Uh,
I work from home and I don't talk to other therapists as often as I'd like, but it's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
for sure. Have a great day, and we will talk again.
Okay, good. Great.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Meet Your Mental Helper. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can find them on our guest directory at meetyourmentalhelper.com. You can find their social media links to follow them and also ways to directly contact them. If you would like to be on the podcast, join our Meet Your Mental Helper network. And we have several memberships that support the work we do that allow unknown experts to be seen. Look forward to hearing from you soon and see you at our next podcast.